I am grateful to Austin Public Libraries, which quench many thirsts. At the Terrazas, I read one page of memoir, Anthony Kiedis. Oak Springs, Willie Mae Kirk, I read Asterix comics, browse the nonfiction. The Carver, the best. 2 copies of the complete works of Langston Hughes. Largest collection, stairwell or elevator, Falk Downtown Central.
Grant Cross opens the 4th episode of the Aural Literature podcast series with haikus about Austin Public Library. This episode features the work of Jamaica Cole, Cindy St. John, Julie Conquest, and Kyle Schlesinger, who are all reading at the Aural Lit program at the Terrazas Branch on April 27th. We will also hear more from Grant Cross, who will be reading at the program on May 25th. Let's now listen to some poems from Kyle Schlesinger.
Providence. What's on television? Just another hallucination. We've got the volume at 45 to make the weather sound better. There's a place where Zeppelin's always on, but we don't take the lyrics too seriously, like Conrad's mom. And there's always a haircut you don't understand. Sutherland's voice, Berrigan's Providence, a way of checking tables, and there's a D&D on every corner. And then something changed, and everyone turned on the radio, TV, whatever. And I wonder where you are, where Huey's at, blathering. Cape Cod, 89. Once removed, we're watching Hannah and her sisters on the tube. Sunday afternoon motel room, and there's that chlorine hairdryer smell of seaweed, new carpet, and nicotine. Midwinter days, but not in that order. There's a knock at the door, and a beautiful stranger climbs into bed with us, without saying a word. The air is very blue. I guess everyone is crazy about Hannah and her sisters. Hours pass, and it's drizzling, so a couple from Tennessee gives us a ride to a new bar in an industrial park. We're planning a wedding, or that was the impression. Their van is really clean. Where there's music, I just want to kiss your face to see if you want any more face. I've got the seedy taste of Christmas in my mouth. Rain falls on our parade, faded and clean. Jump shot for Tom. Before the flat, a 5th. Ball to the wind, pissing in paradise, small stone eyes cast each day different gray. High tops of youth, all you do is point and shoot. Take that poem to church. Knock at door, but who's asking? Suede orange cabin, but who's asking? A name to go by. All arise, knock at door. Weather shows, but never station, but who's asking? But never station, knock at door. Repeat after me, weather shows on the corner. Think it over, but never station, but who's asking? A name to go by, but nothing last on the corner. Pretty great for Sandy. Somebody calls it a wizard's tea. Somebody came and licked my knee. Something beautiful for John. Think of something, now think of something else. The green that is apples is the green you may recall, as you were saying, where you kept putting it. Ring and wood reminds, a certain ring to it. Just then the buck stops and everyone gets off. Behind twined years, hum after the house lights come on and on again. Don't even go there. Outcast moon doesn't sound right. There's a table for 2 through the floating doors, where the air breathes in a small pond, through cattails and sand, where train tracks run forever, and trains we've never seen. Ambient summer storm, we brought our nets anyways. I retrace my steps in the dark, write another 16-liner, and the air feels like my body, like smoke and seaweed, and the streets are empty. Inside your body, it's wonderful being inside out. There's something else in the air. No one can touch or stay home. You clean the bathroom on Sundays with the radio on. A transistor plain as day. It's times like these, when no one's around, when trees are the weeds of winter, and there's a glow of green light in the snow. Yeah, one more. Up close. And the poets that has the best of everything, and the most that is nothing better than a teaser, a scroll made of paper, a gold shiny piece of paper. They shall walk by fries in summer, by a jar of many ones. I got a picture of gum that's special, because it's a piece of treasure.
Up next is a short story by Jamaica Cole. We will hear more from her later in the episode as well.
This is called Swimming. The first time we swim in a pool, I am expecting a game of aqua tag. My playful look of shock when you splash me. Our eventual coupling in the shallow end. My wet hair will shine like a sea mammal. Instead, you swim laps like an Olympian, while I entertain myself with underwater handstands at the 4-foot mark. I perfect my pointed toes and balance like this for what I consider an impressive number of seconds, probably a personal record. In the ocean on my birthday, I am drunk and screaming at the sea to knock me over. The sea obliges, and I am thrown and overturned in the sand and foam. I emerge each time as a newborn, shrieking with laughter. You may be watching from the shore. I may be showing off. We go to Hawaii. We buy snorkels, masks, and flippers, and I buy myself an unsinkable kickboard, but I still feel like I'm going to drown. It takes me all day to get out past the point where the rocks are scraping up my knees, and by the time we're finally following the same fish around, the sun is setting and I'm shivering. The second day, I allow myself into the deeper water, intensely watch the scuba divers bubble by below, and the schools of bright fish dart around in formation. I lose sight of you once in a while, and am overwhelmed by the great depth and by my smallness. I feel as though I'll never see you again, or maybe as though you never existed at all. The lake is low in August, like a dream I had once, where the entire ocean was ankle-deep in Caribbean blue. We wade out for what seems like miles, and the water is still only up to our stomachs. When it reaches our chests, you asked me to swim out with you. I decline. Instead, I plant my feet against the slow waves and watch you make your way out, away from the giraffe-spotted refractions in the sand in front of me, and into the deeper blue. Your figure, that familiar pink square of your back, growing tinier in the blue distance. I think I see your hand shoot up and beckon to me one last time, but my glasses are on shore, so I can pretend that I didn't. When the water reaches your shoulders, I see you pause, drawing a breath before you dive. You reemerge exultant. I imagine what swimming must feel like to you, a rush of freedom, a triumph, your body bending nature to its will. Even underwater, that cowlick of yours is, I assume, ever resilient. We had once, years ago, raced toward the surf in February moonlight, most of our clothes left behind with our cackling friends. You sped ahead of me at first, and I willed myself to catch up to you. In the dark, you took your path for granted, and the shelf of beach below you dropped off, dropping you with it, face first into the sand. Oblivious, I charged gleeful into the ocean, alone.
Libertine headdress leaves buttress belongings behind, sails on a short stack. Maintains leagues of emotional distance, adamantly pledges undying nothings, the impatient undressing of everything. Libertine head rush, shifting magnificence, brilliant indulgences. Accepting the headdress, stressing roommates out, snails on the short stack. Libertine headdress retains full freedom, negotiates nothing. Liberty headdress, unchecked autonomy, accountable to no God. Powerhouse of social defiance, neither here nor there and everywhere late. But somehow right on time. Arms, face, and hands, black rainbow bands. Thirsty, frivolous, hungry, and curious, heartbreaker headdress. Go ahead, libertine headdress. Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was Grant Cross, who will be reading at the Aural Lit program in May. Now let's listen to the work of Cindy St. John.
I dreamt I counted my inhales and exhales until I reached 300. A ship is sometimes a metaphor for longing. Then I looked at the internet and cried. YOLO. I don't know the names of stars or their constellations. I don't know the names of clouds. I don't know the names of trees, most flowers, most plants in general. I don't know the tune a man whistles next door, though I'm usually pretty good at identifying songs. I don't know the meanings of acronyms. I just looked up IRL, which means in real life. In real life, I stare at the stars and the clouds and the trees and flowers and plants and the movements the wind makes in these things for hours. You only live once. Last week, my friends had to define FOMO for me, which means fear of missing out. I fear missing out on real life, though I don't know what that means. I fear missing out on the future. I want to live a very long time. Pink, gray fog at dusk. What am I forgetting? Maybe I will never die. My friend sent me an article titled, Scientists Discover How to Turn Light into Matter After an 80-Year Quest. There was a graph with different wavy and straight lines. The words smashed, crushed, collided, burst, explosion, mysteries, puzzle, laser, fire, gold, and of course light several times. They never expected anyone to physically demonstrate this prediction. I think about holding light in my hands as if it's a small marble while I sit in the drive-through car wash. I slowly move forward when the green light is on. I stop when the red light is on. I still believe in so many things. We are the champions. This morning I read about some guys who broke into Michael Jackson's abandoned Neverland Ranch, drank his grape soda, then wiped their fingertips off the plastic bottles and put them back in the fridge. This morning I read about a woman who said she wanted to die. Why go on, she thought. But then she ate the most delicious peach and changed her mind. I think of all the many things that make me want to live, and money is not one of them. This morning I read like 200 poems that made me want to live. I tell people on the street that I'm trying to write poems as this is an okay thing to say. And then I tell them about the Neverland Ranch break-in and the suicidal woman and the peach, and that usually goes over well. Last night our son cried fiercely, shaking because his favorite Spider-Man pajamas are now too small, because he's growing bigger and older, and I wonder if maybe we should all feel this way, this much, but I don't say this aloud. Red light, green light, humming air conditioner, a kind of magic between us. Fried shrimp emoji. You can't take a picture of the moon, though we all tried. Split open in the night, everything expands to become big enough to hold us. Then we drove home from the beach along the hurricane evacuation route and stopped to eat at a 24-hour Whataburger. Escape aperture. My morning with the morning of the poem. Reading James Schuyler as it rains in the country, The sound of drops on the leaves of the large green tree out the window on the roof of the barn. I bought the book at a used bookstore and the binding is falling apart, falling into my lap, white, yellow, pink. I had to take the cover off. All this beauty makes it hard to write a poem. Once on the city bus, the woman across from me ate an entire ear of corn raw and then flossed the rest of the trip. Another time, the man in front of me was blaring music through his headphones while he hand-sewed a birthday card, threading the lines to each letter of the poem at the end of the card and cross-stitch pattern. Can you imagine? I wrote this. The words curve. Green, green, green. Give my love to, anyone. I dreamt a man held a snake by the neck, and at the end of the snake was another snake, and then another man, and this went on for some time. Man, snake, hand, neck, neck, hand, snake, man. Snakes don't really have necks, but you know what I mean.
Taken hold in me, the whim is now the belief, and what a relief. Appease the wrong gods, and time itself may unhinge, leaving us stranded. The looser we get, the easier it will be to get more undone. I've been a miner, figuratively speaking, for a heart of gold. Like desperados, geopsychologically waiting for the train.
Again, that was Grant Cross, and now let's listen to the work of Julie Conquest.
If you were to turn a constellation inside out and place it deep in the desert of Arizona, you would get the bright white RV clusters that the loners talk about. Clusters on BLM land. Clusters for up to 14 days at a time. Clusters waiting out the winter and hiding from the holidays. You can drive anywhere out there and find these clusters. Some shine brighter on the map. Some have reputations that travel from RV to RV all the way up to Canada. One of the guys who lives out there has a full beard and hair down to here. He wears a dress, and this is the honest-to-God truth. These things commence with laughter. Some drift in and out, and others stay for the whole season. The man in the dress is probably better than the bookseller in Quartzsite. Everyone knows who he is. He is spectacular, you see, because he doesn't wear anything most of the time. The word is he is a retired musician who was once very talented. He used to play shows all over the East Coast. Now he wears a little knitted thong out in the desert when he sells the books he collects during his travels. They say he is skinny, sinewy, with skin leathery and brown from the sun. And just like that, clusters define coordinates. Around fires, markers come to life to show you have arrived. You've been there because maybe you saw the man who didn't wear as much clothing as you do. Due north of the craggy Florida mountains, about 20 miles from Mexico, everything Alice took with her is arranged in a charred circle. Items gain color the farther they sit from the sooty center. The police officer said, "You see that smoke cloud over there? That came from here." Cheryl was on her way back from Walmart and saw the flashing lights and just assumed it was domestic violence. She had no idea why she thought that. It is not even like there are many couples out here. It is amazing to see what sort of things remain intact after these kinds of incidents. Often it is the things that flew far enough away from the blaze. The unworn red t-shirt she won in a raffle at an antique rally, her favorite book of slow cooker recipes, the ugly gray pillow she kept around for Foxy to relax on. Laid open to the sky are the entrails of a life gathered so it could go, and go it finally did. In an explosion that occurred within minutes of 10 a.m. on the morning after Thanksgiving, Alice blew herself out of her Class C travel trailer into the dust of the New Mexico desert. Her hair was on fire. Careful murmurs around cards that night pray the insurance company doesn't find out the real story. They say occasions like these bring out the best and the worst of people. That morning brought out the best of Jim, who gathered her up from the ground and patted the flames out of her charred silver strands. This has probably not been the first fire here, but it is one to remember. Everyone nods. One to remember for those who can remember. Everyone agrees this happened because Alice has short-term memory loss. In the midst of lighting her ceramic heater to ward off the chill of the desert morning, she had forgotten something, and so propane filled the air as she put on her slippers and ignited before she could go for a last walk with Foxy. Now Foxy is in a box out in front of Jim's trailer. Somebody said there is a pet cemetery here. Right out back behind the storage containers, you can find a small collection of crosses where people have buried the dogs that never made it to the next destination. And it sounds like both Foxy and Alice are at the end of a road. It is time for Alice to hang up her keys, the roving community has decided. This lifestyle isn't for her anymore. She has to go home. Even though she hasn't spoken much about family, perhaps there are some relatives who can take her in. Someone thinks they might recall her mentioning a son, but reckons they don't get on so well together. Alice is real independent. The word is either you're in this lifestyle partly because you don't have a family or your family doesn't understand why you're in this lifestyle. Alice is good people. I mean, she's got a little problem with short-term memory, but she is good people, the voices murmur. Everything she owned was in her trailer. Gloria says the heat is so strong it will melt the plastic on the wires inside the metal frame of the RV. There are things melting we cannot see. Despite the dismantled shipping pallets burning, the enthusiasm of George as he brings back a piece of mesquite from amidst the creosote, or Larry's attentive raking of the coals, the cast-iron pot is always suspended over the fire. On the still and empty pot remains a crusted vestige of meals that have happened and those still to come. They create a hearth out of the sandy knoll upon which we find ourselves gathered night after night to ward off the early frigidity of January. It is so cold that the fire becomes an addiction, nearness to it a sort of holding. To leave this holding is to be confronted, to push through that confrontation and to hold breath across the shit-spotted sand, jaw clenched to punctuate teeth chatters. There are more chatters than steps that take us from the fire to our chosen parking spots. These days, parking spots are being demarcated on the bare desert, and some people say if you show your plot enough care, if you build a fence out of extra liquor bottles, tires, or hay bales, they might just let you homestead it. This very act of making the space mine is careful and precise. There is a placing of things inside a delineated boundary. Out there is you, inside is me. Inside are trailers and boxes, the scraps of my life that I need to make a life. Outside is raw. Inside I know this stuff. The more time in a space, the more knowing. The guy in the white trailer, here for 21 winters, and the one in the brown, 5. The more winters, the greater chance that if your tent is there when I arrive in October, I will park so close you will move. There is this proximity to me and mine that will make you want to leave. I don't even have to have a dog, I just need to come here enough. I can retire for brandy in my trailer well before sunset, and still this place is mine because I am here. To be here enough is to leave signs, both actual and gestural, to mark a place with a boundary or to socially designate my being through nods, how are you? He saw me here, so this is my place. The more they see me, the less there will be questions. There is ownership in this acknowledgement, ownership in the dust and grease clinging to this pot winter after winter. When does the moment fragment, revealing the fissures of here that can be traced to the past? The year she was the wagon master, she scrambled to get in all her paperwork on time. Pushing 80, her 3 sons walked her down the aisle, the groom giddy like a kid. They had known each other from church or something for about 50 years. After losing their spouses, they found one another. Relationships are discouraged, but no one raises an eyebrow if Anne walks into Glenn's trailer. They just laugh and say, "Put us in loner's jail." Can you practice staying still long enough to be haunted? Her son-in-law said she couldn't do a 5th will, but she is out there now. The first time she went to Arizona on her own, they said, "Please call. Let us know you are safe." Most of their kids are glad to see them go, and everyone down south is relieved to get away from families during the holidays. There is something that happens when we are together. We no longer know where we are unless we find our way there together. And then there are the times for the unraveling of certainty and the calm of group knowing. Times in which the wearers of our end-up need to have cleared bounds. At this age, it is important to know things together sometimes. But it is all democratic, you see. A potential list of 6 places gets narrowed down to 3 because it is a Saturday night and we can't all fit in one place anyway. And so Italian and Japanese lose out to the steakhouse, the Greek cafe, and the Cajun joint. The procession begins under the carefree RV resort sign at 5 p.m., which really means 4:40. Greek is at the very front, split between 2 cars, and there is some talk about if everyone has made it. Now, if everyone would line up, steakhouse people last, then we can all get where we are going in good time, perhaps even beat the crowds. It is a Saturday night, didn't you hear me the first time? Here the certainty is a ready car behind another, a seat belt not only found but fastened, and the trip that was already made to the bathroom. In between the flapping of Texas flags next to RV park flags next to American flags, we have our own country. Our own country starts like this, with a lead car that knows the way to the closest strip mall. But there is everything there. Coming to Austin means going to there because there is everything. There is a flatness to this everything, the way in which people proclaim some places to be the best. All the types of food you could want, and a Walmart, if you know the way. If you know the way, if you have been there before, or if you have a place here among us. Less than a minute into the expedition, the train of certainty has been breached. Someone wasn't brave enough to make a right-hand turn onto frontage road in time, and so now the steakhouse people are going to be lost. The Greek faction is too hungry to wait, but we manage to keep the Cajuns on our tail at least until our exit about 5 minutes later when we wave them on. There is some second guessing about whether Cajun might have been a better choice among the Greeks, but this is quelled with a reminder that the steakhouse people may not even find their way there at all. Who knows, perhaps they're still headed down the highway. Maybe they don't even know where to stop. We turn off to make the necessary call, and there is some polite cursing under breath. The certainty has been breached by the steak people. If only they had been paying attention, we would already be eating halloumi. After a passionate phone call, we know they're approaching their medium rares, and so we can finally continue on to our white wines with ice cubes.
That was Julie Conquest. Let's now listen to another story from Jamaica Cole.
This is called Barrio Viejo. The only chair left in my kitchen was uncomfortable. It was an antique, wooden with a leather seat, cushion missing. Whenever I'd sit in it, the leather would stretch and I'd sink in until I was supported only by a hollow wooden square. I'd get up after a while and have indentations left in lines across the backs of my thighs and up the sides of them. There had been 3 chairs like this, and 2 of them had, on top of these malfunctions, a feral upholstery tack sticking slyly up between the wood and the leather. My roommates and I could never count on which chair would be tackless, and we could never tell them apart. The chair's brothers had already been loaded up and moved, so I had sunk slowly into this one, dazed from the generic pink allergy pills I'd swallowed earlier. My ex-roommate Kay was late meeting me and unreachable by telephone. I'd called her, staring blankly at the scratched-up kitchen table. By the time her voicemail picked up, I'd forgotten where I was and who I was trying to reach, so I mumbled a vague, "call me back," and slumped down further into my seat. The sogginess of my thoughts was only slightly preferable to my violent sneezing fits, and neither allowed me to drive a car safely. I checked the time again, then put my head down on the table and considered climbing up onto it and napping. Instead, I transferred myself from the chair onto the floor. My bones seemed to make direct contact with the wood as I lied down, and I could feel my elbows and hips instantly bruising. There was no comfortable position. I turned my head and looked out at the foreshortened floorboards. A layer of dust, like gray snow, covered the white expanse of the kitchen. The table legs jutted up into the distance like monoliths. This floor had a former life. The wood had previously functioned as high school bleachers, and was so certainly hiding years of carvings of hearts and initials and fuck yous. I imagined a ghost love story developing below these boards, apparitions of dusty young things giggling and whispering to each other between the thin slats of light. 2 phantom high schoolers scratching their names into the wood beneath me. I gazed up at the ceiling. It was stucco, which seems to always be the finish on the ceiling every time I end up lying on a floor. Stucco has always made me imagine a person vomiting on a smooth surface, being too lazy to clean it up, and so letting it dry and painting over it instead. The air conditioner hummed, and I could hear nothing else. In my head, I wrote a haiku. On floor of old house, woozy from allergy meds, shoes as a pillow. This took me approximately 15 minutes. If there had been someone looking in, what would they have seen? A woman on a dirty floor in a sundress, hair splayed out, one arm in the air, eyes closed, counting syllables on her fingers. What's wrong with her? I started to doze off, and in that space between awake and asleep, I thought of every nap I'd ever taken. I used to sleep on the front porch of my childhood home on summer afternoons. It was concrete, but I was still young enough to be able to fall asleep anywhere. There was a low step that I would rest my head on, and the shaded sidewalk would stay cool even on the hottest days. I thought of a late afternoon at home while my parents were still married. They'd been fighting, as was their habit, and I was doing homework in front of the television, as was mine. My father was attempting to fix the fireplace, which had been sending smoke into the room instead of upward. He seemed to know very little about the inner workings of chimneys, but out of a combination of pride and stinginess, he generally refused to call repairmen. He'd been lying on his side, muttering, head twisted upward, jabbing into the chimney with a long brass poker. My brother and I watched with glazed-over eyes a rerun of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, our math books forgotten beside us. A half hour passed. My parents reached a temporary truce, and my mother had begun to make dinner. A knife chopped vegetables on a wooden cutting board. Pots and pans clanged. Melissa Joan Hart conversed with a taxidermied house cat. My father gradually ceased his grumbling and jabbing and became still, allowing the tension to creep out of the room unnoticed. It was an odd moment when we realized that our father had fallen asleep in the fireplace. Such a bizarre and unimpressive event in my family history. A slow look passed between my brother and I, a widening of the eyes, a laugh suppressed, a shared embarrassment that was also some kind of victory. We silently urged the world to never make another sound, unless the absence of sound might wake him. We wished for a sleeping potion, an incantation, a collapsing of time to prevent the end of this peaceful slumber. In a way it worked, because I don't remember that moment ending. I don't remember our father waking up, but he must have continued his efforts with the chimney. My brother and I must have gone our separate ways, he to his room, I to mine. We must have eaten dinner in silence. We must have gotten up from the table as soon as we'd finished, so we could watch more television. It must have been like any other night. 12 years later, lying on the floor in Tucson, Arizona, I had dozed off. A foreign sound brought me suddenly into myself. To my left, just out of arm's reach, my telephone lay glowing. I rolled over to my elbows. The text message simply said, "Fell asleep," and I wondered if I was dreaming. I wondered if everyone I knew had simultaneously taken a nap. I sat up and called Kay. My mouth had been closed to the world for hours. I stretched my tongue. My saliva tasted sweet. I said, "Are you still coming to the house?" She yawned into the phone. "Can we clean tomorrow?" I yawned back yes. I reached for my deflated shoes, shoved them 2/3 of the way onto my feet, and stumbled to the door. I stopped for a moment in the threshold and looked back at the lonely kitchen. Never again would I witness this exact light hitting this exact paint color with these exact shadows. No future tenants would arrange the furniture exactly as we'd had it, or have the same meals simmering on the stove with the same combination of spices we'd used. I held up my phone and took a picture. The camera's shutter sound effect echoed. This picture seems unremarkable at first, something that would belong in a Craigslist ad if the floor weren't so dirty. But if you look closely, you can just make out the footprints in the dust that we made when we lived there. And if you look even closer and concentrate hard enough and long enough, you'll start to see ghosts. Above the high school ghosts in the floorboards are ghosts rearranging the furniture, ghosts slow dancing to Nina Simone in the middle of the night, ghosts stumbling and drunk and making quilts and writing stories, all existing together, crossing paths without acknowledging each other, walking through each other, doing endless reenactments of trivial events. My mother came to stay at my house once, so a ghost of her is sleeping in my bed with the ghosts of my past lovers, but I know they can't sense one another. There are millions of ghosts of Kay and I haunting nearly every spot in the house. My father's ghost is also in Tucson somewhere, but it is the ghost of him as a young man, long before we met. He is loving my mother's young woman ghost and playing with the baby ghost of my older brother. Back in California, my father's ghost is still asleep in the fireplace, its snores echoing endlessly, while the undead versions of my brother and I maintain eye contact in our shared strange excitement, silently nodding to each other forever. We won. We won. We won.
Grant Cross ends this episode of Aural Lit with some final thoughts.
Time is relative. Hang on, I'll prove it to you. Hang on forever.